Hey guys, so my science project, my lesson plan is for a gifted epidemiology class. It's a new elective in Georgia. I'm going to be a new teacher next semester in grades 9 through 12, so I'm definitely going to be teaching some electives. So I wanted to kind of step into the role and look at epidemiology because it's something that I'm really interested in. So this class, because it's elective, there's going to be a lot of gifted. But the school that I'm teaching in is Title I in a very diverse community. So it's got to have a lot of different socioeconomic demographics. So there's going to be a lot of different insight and a lot of different perspectives, especially in a class that's so relevant culturally. And because this isn't a regular class and it's an elective, there isn't an EOC, so they're not going to be prepping for an exam, but more learning based on the interest in the topic. So, like I said, it's EPI, and there are new GSE standards, specifically SEP I1 is going to be covered throughout this unit, which says obtain, evaluate, and communicate information to understand and analyze the disease process, which, as you can see in the bottom, I'm using COVID as my anchoring phenomenon. It's going to be a great lesson. It's going to be something that I would really want to implement, so I'm hoping that I can actually teach this class. I'm a little bit long-winded, so I'm going to try and get through this within my 15-minute time limit. The NGSS standards for life science, they aren't directly linked to epivirology or microbiology, but a lot of them will help with the cross-cutting concepts. So I'll use the NGSS standards for life sciences to teach things concurrently with the epi topics that we're covering. So like natural selection and evolution and some of the biology topics of molecular and biological processes will be used for the life sciences of the NGSS. So there are 3 lessons. They're to help understand viruses, disease, pathogenesis, molecular biology, physiology, but also develop an understanding of public health, because a lot of students just think public health is a government role, where, as we know, science is heavily involved in making public health decisions. So that's kind of what I want to get across in this unit. The anchoring phenomena, like I said, would be COVID-19, specifically because it's highly variable. It's not something that we really even understand as of now, almost more than a year later. It's prominent in the media, so it'll be really engaging. The virus covers a lot of different perspectives. So, like I said, we're going to learn how it functions biologically, physiologically, then the epi perspective and the public health approach to dealing with the virus. So the main questions will be, why has COVID sent the world into such turmoil? What are the characteristics of COVID that have made it so difficult to deal with? And how do we treat a virus like COVID? This would be best done face-to-face, but because it's so crazy right now, it could be accommodated to be taught virtually. CCSD is offering in-person and virtual virtual options, so I think it's a good idea to have lessons that work both ways. So the first lesson, how do viruses work and why? This focuses specifically on the biology and physiology just behind viruses in general, specifically studying their function and the physiological role. So how viruses get into the body, how they propagate through the body, and then the physiological ramifications once they're in the body. So this is so we can develop a better understanding of virology and then use it to think later in the lessons about a higher level of thinking. We're going to still focus on the first goal, the first content standard in EPI, and specifically the first 2. So asking questions about the disease and pathogens, and then constructing an explanation of the body's defenses. So that's the physiological focus that I was talking about. The learning objectives in this lesson will be that the students are able to explain the differences between different types of viruses and notice key characteristics that result in the physiological mechanisms. They'll be able to identify viruses based on the protein characteristics and physiological symptoms, and then they'll be able to construct an explanation about the body's immune function and defense against viruses. The SEPs are engaging in an argument from evidence, so they're going to develop an understanding and then be able to argue as to why the viruses are what they are and why they function how they function based on the evidence that they see in their learning process, but also in their activities. The disciplinary core ideas, the LS1 of molecules and organisms. This is the NGSS standard that I was talking about, focusing on. So because viruses are so different and so varied, their structure and function is really important. And feedback mechanisms in the body are basically our physiological method of defending against viruses and using a feedback mechanism to discourage the bad things that are going on inside the living system. Cross-cutting concepts using patterns, so how viruses function to understand the patterns of virology. Systems and system models as in the body system, and then structure and function, like I was just saying with the viral particles. So this lesson we'll have a 10-minute hook that has a introduction about viruses and their ability to enter the body. My Wi-Fi is pretty slow, so I'm not going to waste your guys' time with the links, but I'll include them in my description. So I think that it's a really good thing to have the class discuss what they learned, what they saw in the video, because when I was in school, I would just watch a video, kind of put my head down, knock off. It was time to chill. But if we talk about it as a class, they get a little bit more out of the video. If we stop it here and there during the video, then we can focus on main points. Then the body of the lesson will be another video about viruses and their molecular makeup and the physiological role that we watch as a class. Like I said, we'll stop and focus on main points. We'll write them down. We'll take notes. We'll leave them up on the board with specific things about the viral particles that are specific to viruses or particular viruses, and then the physiological things that come out of those viruses. And so, like I said, this will be a little bit more interactive and engaging than a typical lecture. And then the students will use an interactive website that lists viruses with their associated symptoms and treatment methods. And then after a few minutes of going through as a group, the students will be able to go through independently and choose a virus that they find interesting and present what they found to the class. So the closing will be everybody doing their presentations. So during the class, during the investigation, the teacher will point out like a few things, like almost present a rubric of what they want to see from each virus so that the students have an idea of what they're going to be presenting on. And that'll be the way that the teacher assesses. Modifications that you could do to change this lesson would be do the investigations in small groups or pairs to make it a little bit faster. And then the teacher could specifically assign viruses, so it would cut down on time, but then also the teacher would know exactly what they're looking for instead of having it be a little bit more of an open investigation. But I like having the research component to it as well. Okay, 7 minutes. Let's see if we can do this. So lesson 2, again, this one is building off of the previous lesson, making them use their understanding of viruses. And then we're building on top of it to understand regionality, and then using what we learned in the past with the viral particle biology and then the physiological symptoms and other characteristics to assess the viruses. Adding a little bit more of the standards, we're including the third and fourth, which I'm seeing now is wrong, but you construct an explanation about the body's defense, and then construct an argument from evidence to explain how the evolution of pathogens result in diseases that will continue to a public health concern. And then SEP I4, which is communicate information to analyze associations and causations of health disease. So this is kind of introducing that regionality role, the other confounding variables that are such a prominent part of epidemiology. So the students will be able to identify the viruses based on the characteristics and display their understanding of the fundamentals. They will use information about antibiotics and public health interventions for viruses in order to suggest treatment methods and interventions to protect from the disease. And then students will use a multidisciplinary approach and higher level thinking to predict public health interventions apart from what they found in the readings. They'll use the science engineering practices of developing and using models, analyzing and interpreting data, and then constructing explanations and designing solutions. Still using the NGSS standards because as we talk about viruses, we're still going to always come back to the physiological role and the protein study of structure and conformation equaling function. And then patterns, cause and effect, and system and models as our cross-cutting concepts again. So we'll start by a 5-minute discussion, just kind of engaging, getting people going, getting them talking about what we talked about in the last lesson. They'll once again bring up the virus that they talked about in the last lecture and the mechanism, just so we can have a little reminder about viral mechanisms. And then the body of this lesson, which makes up most of the time, the students will work in groups or independently to investigate a few different things. They'll be given case studies or data tables or charts that have information on them, which will promote the analyzing of data. And they'll determine which viruses are present and whether it's like in a community, in a person, in a city, country, world, whatever. And then they'll range in severity, mechanism, and treatment methods. And the students will use any of the outside resources that they can find to do 3 different things. 1, identify the virus. 2, identify the mechanisms by which the virus functions. And then 3, identify the best approach to treating the virus individually, and then as what the best public health intervention would be. And then closing, the students will all come together as a class and we'll go through the different findings from each group, and each group will present what they found for treating the virus. The groups will complete the assignment and submit, and then the level of understanding will be gauged by the teacher during the group discussion and the presentation of idea. There are modifications that could be done. The case studies could be divided amongst groups so that each group presents a specific one, which is probably what would be done. And then the students who are struggling could be given an extra day. They could work on it overnight and then present the following day. So lesson 3 is focusing on COVID as a virus. So what the heck is going on? That's the name of the lesson. I like that the most. So it's an in-depth look at the coronavirus from multiple different perspectives, multiple disciplinary approach. Because it's an elective and focused on the interests of students, we'll use an epidemiological approach to assess COVID-19 and the public health response to the virus, including another GSE standard of studying the health-related messages in the media to make informed public health decisions and life goals. The students will develop an understanding of COVID and how the viral particles and the physiological mechanisms work, and then the public health interventions that were included. And then using hindsights and the new understandings along with the previous understandings with the coronavirus, they will develop models for assessing public health and intervening. So this was a really cool part of the lesson where we'll go back and pretend like we're in the beginning of March 2020, knowing what we know now, and we'll talk about what interventions we would put in place. So they'll use multiple different science and engineering practices, the same NGSS standards, and then the cause and effect and the system models, cross-cutting concepts. So we'll go through a guided lecture and then a video about COVID-19, specifically the biology and the diagnosing methods, the biology behind the diagnosing methods, the RT-PCR testing, and then the antibody testing. And then during the body of the lesson, the students will each get assigned unique aspects of COVID-19, whether it's the public health aspect, whether it's the biology aspect of the treatment, whether it's the biology aspect of the disease or of the virus or the physiological symptoms. And then the groups will take notes on their classmates' presentations. And then the teacher will kind of help in these areas. So during their presentations, if there are things that they missed, if there are things that the teacher thinks are really interesting, they'll include those too. I got 1 minute left. So the closing would be a small ticket out the door quiz about the class presentations, just to see what they caught from the lessons, what they caught from their classmates' presentations, and then a way to assess their overall understanding of the COVID-19 virus. Like I said, the assessment will be the ticket out the door quiz, and then the teacher will informally gauge their understanding during the presentation. Modifications would include the teacher doing the lecture for a little bit longer and then a longer worksheet at the end, or the students could be given models of COVID-19 figures and asked to analyze and interpret the findings. I think this lesson is really cool because it gives the students a chance to be students, but also be public health professionals and epidemiologist and assume a real professional role. Thank you so much. You're awesome. 15 minutes is up.